What's good, everyone? Evan Jarvis here, and today we are going to be doing another tier list video for Heroes of Hold'em. This tier list will be ranking the Ranger abilities in Heroes of Hold'em, ranking those abilities from S tier to D tier. Now, just for some context, this tier list, like all my other ones, is mainly focused on the tough field tournaments where you are going to be playing against other heroes, whether it's the 6-hero sit and go or the regular MTTs where you're going to be facing a lot of heroes. That's what this tier list is going to be focused on. It's also going to have some information that helps you in the zombie horde, the big field tournaments. However, it's not going to focus so much on the 2-man sit and goes or the 4-man sit and goes where you have a lot of NPCs in the mix who don't have spells. Granted, I do think that Ranger is one of the best counter characters, so I think it plays better in those fields where you're playing against tough competition anyway. I don't really think it's a great character, a great hero for playing against NPCs because a lot of its benefits come from being able to counter the other players. Anyway, as for my expertise within the game, I finished in the top 10 of the Heroes of Hold'em leaderboard, despite playing much less volume than the players who finished above me. I have final tabled the huge field zombie horde numerous times, and I've got plenty of first place finishes as well against the toughest players in the game. Now, for full transparency, I do not play a ton of Ranger. I do have a perfect Ranger, 778 stats, and I have had fun doing the build with the Ranger. I've played a couple games and scored some wins with it. The Ranger is one of the characters I play most infrequently. And so for this tier list, I first consulted the devs of the game to get their opinions on where abilities should rank. And then, even more importantly, I consulted with the players who play Ranger on a regular basis. There's a player who plays Ranger who usually finishes second or third in the overall leaderboard. He knows how to play Ranger very well. And so I looked at his build. I see what abilities he uses because I have to play against him a fair bit. And then I also spoke to him directly to get his opinions on what should be ranked a little higher and why. So hopefully between all that expert information that I have gone out there and sourced for you in this video, with this tier list, you'll be able to build better Rangers, get more caches, and ultimately get more wins. Let's go ahead and get into it. So first we have Anchor Trap. When heads up, 3x raise your opponent, they are forced to call. We're going to see a lot of this with Ranger, that they have abilities that force their opponents to put chips in. It just kind of traps them into a situation because it's a very trap-based build. Now, we don't get to heads up that often, but because the biggest pay jump in terms of how many hero tokens you get and the biggest rank jump is going to be heads up, because not only are you finishing ahead of whoever you were battling, you finish ahead of everyone. You're going to get the most rank out of anyone who played that event. And so for that reason, having better chances to win heads up, extremely valuable. I'm going to throw Anchor Trap in B tier. It's one that we don't get to use all that often, but when we do get heads up, stacks are usually pretty shallow, and forcing your opponent to call a 3x raise can often mean them being all in or having to play for half their chips. And when you have an above average hand and your opponent has a random hand, that's a big edge. That's a big advantage. So Anchor Trap, definitely going to throw in B tier. Pretty interesting ability. Next, we have Animal Companion. If you control 5 or less minions at the start of the event, create a bear minion under your control. This one I am going to throw in C tier. I know for most of my tier videos that all the, get a free minion spells have found their way into the B tier category. They're for minion builds. I find that the Ranger, as we go through these abilities, you'll see they don't really focus on minions. So I don't really know about doing a minion-based build with a Ranger. And so for that reason, even though it's the same ability as, the other classes, and a bear is a solid minion, I think it ranks similar to a demon in terms of how many points it would go for. It doesn't have a lot of skills that are abilities that complement it, and there aren't a lot of builds that really focus on this. So it's just kind of getting one extra minion with no other buffs or perks. So for that reason, I'm going to throw it in the C tier. All right, Bait. The next hand, player 2 spaces to your right gains the button. Anyone who raises your big blind and does not win the hand takes damage equal to the final pot. Sounds like a fun play. If you executed it, I think it'd be great. You play a monster pot. Whoever doesn't win it takes that much in damage. It's going to lead to a bunch of eliminations. Problem is, people are going to know that bait is active. It's easy for them to play around it. And oftentimes, if someone's going to play a pot knowing that bait is on, they probably have a hand that can win the pot. So they have to get unlucky to miss it. So I do think it's interesting and so I'm going to throw it in the C tier, but I think it's hard to hit and easy to play around. So honestly, it might even make its way to D tier. It's probably pretty close. Next, we have Bleed. Target opponent receives the bleeding debuff for 12 hands. Everyone else gets the bleeding debuff for 4 hands. I don't think bleeding is, you know, that detrimental. I think it's kind of one of the weakest debuffs in the game. I'm going to throw it in the D tier. You know, 3% over 12 hands is 36%, maybe 30%, because, you know, their stack's going to progressively get smaller. And it can be combined with some other abilities that would increase the amount of damage, but it's never going to increase it to enough to be able to take them out of the game the way that, you know, Necros can with Flayed Skin. So I'm going to throw this in the D tier. If you think it's C, that's fine. I don't really think it's going to get higher than that. All right, Blood Offering. Opponents choose to either show both whole cards or get the heavy bleeding debuff for 6 hands. Now, heavy bleeding is double the damage of bleeding, so instead of it being 3%, that would be 6%. If you do it over 6 hands, 36%. It ends up being pretty much the exact same damage as bleed is, except for it to activate, your opponents need to choose to not show their whole cards. So I'm gonna throw this in D tier. It's the same amount of damage, plus your opponents have a way to avoid it. Just not that great in my opinion. All right, Bloody Arrow. Make a raise. Any opponent that does not fold receives the bleeding debuff for 12 hands. This one's also going to be D tier. It's the same as bleed, except our opponents can avoid it. And the raise that we make is not free. If this was like a free straddle, then anyone who folds gets the bleeding debuff. Okay, now it's more interesting. But with us getting no free chips for it and just applying the bleeding debuff, not that interesting. Next up, we have another bleeding debuff. Bloody Goblin Sapper. End of hand Sapper explodes, dealing 10% of opponent's health and damage. Winning the hand, opponents get bleeding debuff for 8 hands. You guys know how I feel about the bleeding debuff at this point. 10% damage to everyone, not that much. Plus, for us to get the bleeding debuff bonus, we also have to win the pot. So many things that have to work out for us to not even do something all that damaging or detrimental to our opponents anyway. That's going to be D tier. Something that's not going to be D tier is Decoy Trap. If you lose a showdown, heal for 75% of your bets in the hand. You guys know how I feel about healing spells at this point. Easy S tier ability. Not quite as good as Holy Shield of the Cleric, where you get 100% of your bets back. But 75% is pretty good. Gives you a second chance when you play an all-in. If you had 100k, you'll still have 75k. If you had 50k, you'll still have 37.5. You still get lots of chips back. Extremely powerful healing spell and a must-have on any Ranger build. Next, we have Feign Injury. Half of your health pool is exiled for the remainder of the hand, which is kind of like all-in protection. I'm going to throw this one in B tier. If we're on the flop, we've already committed a decent amount of our chips, probably. But, you know, if we have a draw and we want to play the draw aggressively, but we don't want to risk busting on this hand, casting something like Feign Injury is really useful because you can guarantee that you have chips to play on the following hand, and then you can play all-in bets knowing that if you lose the all-in, you're still in the game. So is situational, does require, you know, not all of your chips to be in the pot already, because if you're all in, what's the point of saving half your health, or if 90%'s in? So you do need to plan ahead around it. But the fact that it can give you some all-in protection, pretty useful. I'm going to throw it in the B tier. Next, we have Fickle Nature. Steal any sheltering buffs, whatever duration is left, add an additional 2 hands, and double the healing bonus. This one's going to be A tier in my books. I think pretty much all the shelter spells and stealing shelter spells make their way into the A tier. Shelter is just a really useful ability in the game, and stealing people's shelter is even more useful. Someone's trying to heal, someone's trying to get back in the game. No, sir, you are going to have to post those blinds, you are going to have to post those antes, and not only am I taking your healing buff, I'm going to go ahead and double it and add an extra 2 hands. The only downside to Fickle Nature is if you don't find yourself in a game where people have healing or people don't cast shelter, you won't be able to cast it, and it's a wasted ability slot. But it's really useful when you pull it off, and it can take people who are finding a way to get through life support to no longer have that support and be in a really deadly situation. Fun things are when you steal someone's shelter and they steal it back, and it can go back and forth. Another thing that's nice about Fickle Nature is it's not brittle, so you can cast it, get it back, and effectively get multiple shelter buffs if there are a bunch of people who have shelter, which in strong lineups there will be, because most people are equipping Shelter as one of their abilities. Speaking of Shelter, the next one on the list is Find Shelter. Shelter for 6 hands, 3 at the final table, cannot be used when heads up. A tier. Guaranteed Shelter, 5% healing, no blinds, no antis. The only downside is that it's brittle. You can only use it once. You can't get it back. But unlike Fickle Nature, you can use it whenever you want. You don't need the condition of someone else being in Shelter to be able to use it. You cannot Fickle Nature your own Shelter because you're sitting out. If you could, that would be kind of cool. But that's not a thing for those who may be wondering. Next, we have Guerrilla Tactics. Pay 10% of the pot into the pot. Fold your hand. All money you invested in the pot to this point is removed from the pot and added to the following hand's pot pre-flop. If you win this pot, you win 200%. So I'm going to throw Guerrilla Tactics in the C tier. It's similar to Purgatory and Temporal Displacement, but it's a little bit better because there's a bonus if you win the pot on the next hand. The other ones, you just move your chips from this hand to the next hand and whatever happens, happens. This one, you move your chips to the next hand, and if you win it, you get double the size of the pot. So there is not only the value that you save yourself from maybe being all in this situation, but you also get a bonus if you win the pot on the next hand. So if you find yourself all in and behind, or putting in a lot of chips and being behind on the flop and it's not looking good, throw on Guerrilla Tactics, move on to the next hand, and there's a big bonus waiting for you if you get it. All right, next we have Hemorrhage. Target player and the players to the left and right get the bleeding debuff until they win a hand. You guys know how I feel about bleeding. D tier. Herbal Remedies. Remove any debuffs on your hero. Easy A tier. Much like the sheltering abilities that are pretty much all A tier, having the ability to cleanse debuffs, absolutely essential in the tougher lineups. That's going to be an A tier ability. The only downside is it doesn't cleanse your minions as well, but as I said earlier, Rangers don't really play minion builds anyway, so it's largely going to be irrelevant. Next, we have Marked Prey. Target opponent gains the Omen debuff, which is an additional 25% damage if they lose its showdown until the end of hand. This one I'm going to throw in C tier, only for the fact that Omen can knock a player out. If you stack someone and then they use a healing potion and they get, less than 25% of the pot back, Marked Prey can take them out. If they use Smoke Bomb, which gives them 5 to 20% of the pot, well, that's less than 25% of the showdown loss. So Marked Prey can take them out. It can be used as kind of, kill shot. Yeah, for that reason, it's going to be C. If it didn't work for kind of countering potions and countering smoke bombs, I would put it in D tier. But because it does have that knockout ability, we will throw it in the C, and kind of the image matches up with what it does. All right, next we have Mud Trap. If you have previously folded, you may re-enter the hand by paying 25% of the entire pot. Deactivated if cards are turned up. This one is close between A and B. It's honestly really close between A and B. And I think there's going to be some debate between this one and Root in terms of where I rank them. But I'm going to go ahead and put it in A tier. A couple of benefits about this compared to the other spells that let you get back in the hand. We've seen, I think it's the Druid had Reignite the Flame or something like that, where you can activate it on the turn, which is obviously better. You've seen more of the hand. But Mud Trap, you only have to pay 25% of the entire pot. So if it's a heads up or a three-way pot, you're getting a discount. The only way you'd be paying kind of the full price you would otherwise pay is if it was a 4 or 5 or family pot. So because you're both getting into the pot at a discount and you get to wait to see the flop for free, basically, you can get in there with a sneaky flush or a sneaky straight or a sneaky 2-pair. This is really valuable. It lets you hop into a pot that you're very likely to win because otherwise you wouldn't play it. You get to get into that pot at a discount. And I mean, as long as the other players aren't all in, you can use this ability. So you can carry this all the way till very late game and snipe a monster pot that you should have no business playing because you know that you've got 2-pair. Your opponents probably aren't going to beat it. You can also set up some potential bluffs, but I would be cautious about doing that. I'd usually make this play for value. All right, next we have Natural Recovery. Receive 200% of the pot when winning heads up with a minion. This is going to go into the B tier category. This is, again, Rangers don't really focus on having minions, but they do have some abilities that take advantage of minions. This is one of them. if you win the pot against a minion, you get 200% of the pot. Now, I'm not sure if that's 200% extra or 200% total. I'd have to go back and check one of my videos where I use this with the pre-built character. Either way, you're getting double or triple what you would win anyway. It's a lot of free chips, and it's a really good ability to use early game to give yourself an early lead. Minions are easy to beat, they're easy to stack, and to get an extra 100 or 200% of the pot on top of that is a pretty nice bonus. Okay, next we have Pitfall Trap. All opponents who call your raise take 35% of the pot in health damage. This one's pretty interesting. I'm gonna throw it in C tier. I saw Rangers using it initially, but then as they got access to more abilities, it didn't find its way into the rotation anymore. It is pretty cool that you can make a raise that's, you know, huge, and people who have trash hands aren't going to want to call, but they still lose 35% of their health. It's a pretty significant dent. It's better than 10, it's better than 20. It's not 50, but 35% is a lot, especially when people are playing short stack late stages. So I do find it to be pretty useful. Maybe it could sneak its way into B tier. In fact, you know what? I think it will actually. 35% damage is pretty good. And you can do it with an all-in raise. You can do it with a massive raise. You can combine it with spells like Tiger Form, which we're going to get to later. And pretty damaging. I'm curious if you can cast it post-flop as well. I've seen it cast pre-flop, but interesting if you can maybe cast post-flop, although you need to be having a bet and a raise. I think it's usually going to come in pre-flop, so maybe you can't combine it with Tiger Form. But either way, still a pretty good ability. Speaking of good abilities, we have Plague. Target opponent who has debuffs on them. Apply one randomly to everyone else at the table at 50% the duration and damage. So this one's pretty cool. I'm going to throw it in S tier. It can be used a couple of ways. One is if you want to hit someone with something like Venom Arrow and cast poison on them, but you want everyone at the table to get poison, you can then follow it up with Plague. It can be your follow-up ability to make it so that your one debuff that targets one player now targets everybody. The other way that Plague can be used is to basically steal the debuffs that other players are using. If someone's, you know, running Hex with Necro, you can now use Plague and you Hex everybody. You basically mass Hex everyone. If someone's using Bleeding, you could mass Bleeding. I don't know why you would, but you could. If someone's using Burning, you can go mass Burning. So it's really cool because both it can spread the debuffs that you've done, hence why it's called Plague, or you can use it to steal the debuffs other people have used and spread them, hence the Plague. And the 50% duration is a bonus on top. So when I first read it, I thought, oh, okay, it only does half the damage. No, it does the original debuff plus 50% on top of it. So if it's 3%, it becomes 4.5. If it's 4, it becomes 6. If it's 5, it becomes 7.5. Poison, you know, 4 to 6. The only thing it doesn't do is carry other enhancements. Like if someone's cast Flayed Skin and their Hex is now 8% and you cast Plague, it won't be 12%. It will be the initial 3% plus 50% for Plague. So that's something to be aware of, but it's still a very good ability. Next we have Poaching. Destroy target minion that has less than 50% of your health pool. Receive 70% of their health pool. This is a pure minion counter strategy. Very useful for using in early game. Really fun thing you can do is if you get heads up in a pot against a minion and it has less than 50% of your health pool, you can just poach it. They automatically fold, you automatically win the pot, and you steal 70% of their health. Another thing that's really great about poaching is you don't even have to be in the pot against the minion that you're poaching. You just have to see a flop by, you know, calling in the pre-flop phase. Then you can target any minion on the table. So if you have built a good stack, you can take out dragons with this spell. You can take out really powerful minions with this spell. And one of the fun ways of playing Ranger is messing with other players' minions, and Poaching and Natural Recovery are two of those abilities that you'll definitely want to have if you're playing that kind of build. Next we have Pressure Plate, which I don't even think I've seen in the game. I know it's one of the new additions. I didn't see it on the market. I haven't seen anyone use it. So I'm just kind of winging it on this one. Call the big blind for free. Anyone who folds gives you 2% of their health. 2% isn't much. If everyone folds, you're kind of getting 10. But it is a free big blind, so since it's free chips, I'll throw it in C tier. All right, next we have Rain Arrows. Straddle for free. Any opponent folding gains the bleeding debuff for a cycle. Well, you guys know how I feel about bleeding. But you also know how I feel about free chips and free straddles. This is going to be an S tier ability simply for the fact that it has the free straddle going for it, because you can use this late game when the blinds are 1 million, 2 million, and get 4 million free chips. Plus, if people don't want to call that 4 million, they get the bleeding debuff. Is the bleeding debuff going to make a huge difference over 6 hands? Not really, but it's a little extra something on top. And the free straddle is worth its weight in gold. S tier, forget about it. All right, next we have Root, which... this is the one that I kind of had back and forth with Mudtrap. Which one's A tier, which one's B tier? I'm going to throw Root in B tier. Although, man, it's great. Make a 400% bet, which is 4 big blinds, and force the next player to call. The downside to Root is that you have to be post flop and under the gun, which means first to act post flop. So if you're out of position, you have the opportunity to root a player. I thought it was only on the flop. You can cast this on the flop. You can cast this on the turn. You can cast this on the river. The only downside to Root is that you need to have the full 4 big blinds to cast it. If you have 3 big blinds, you can't cast Root and go all in for less than 4 big blinds, and they have to call the 3 big blinds. No, you have to have the 400% bet 4 big blinds behind to cast it. That's probably the only reason it's B tier instead of A tier. And if it was make a 4 big blind bet for free, then it would be S tier, obviously. But if you have, top pair, you can get really good value from this. If you turn a flush or a made hand, you just force your opponent to call, and you can get really good value from this spell. So you can use it both early game to get some value on a made hand, or you can use it late game. Like say you combine it with Anchor, force your opponent to call the 3x raise heads up, and then you outflop them. Actually, I guess you wouldn't be out of position, but you see where I'm going with it. You can get people trapped in situations. Limp in blind versus blind. They see the flop with you for cheap. Next thing they know, they're forced to call off half their stack because you rooted them. So powerful ability, does require a specific situation, does require to have some foresight and some pre-planning, but very useful if you have the chips and you can pull it off. All right, next we have Scent of Blood, 50% damage increase and duration increase to all active bleed debuffs at the table. You guys know how I feel about bleeding, but I do really like abilities that can increase the damage done by a debuff and that increase the length. It's kind of like a lesser version of Flayed Skin. So where Flayed Skin is S tier, this is going to be A tier. On heavy bleeding, it goes from 6% to 9%, not bad. On regular bleeding, from 3% to 4.5%. But doubling or increasing the duration 50% is still adding a fair bit. And I guess if you were to combine this with Plague, like if you hit the table for heavy bleeding, Plague them, so now they're at 9%, right? 6 from the heavy bleeding, another 50% from the Plague, so they're at 9%. And then you hit them with Scent of Blood, that'd be another 4.5%. Now you're hitting them for 13.5% damage for an extended period. It's probably going to be 9 or 12 hands. And at that point, now you're actually starting to do some real damage with bleeding. So the same way for the Necro to get the max benefit from Hex, you want a Flayed Skin twice. Doing a heavy bleeding combined with a Plague and a Scent of Blood, now it's actually starting to get to the point where maybe when used in conjunction, some of these D tier bleeding buffs could actually be moved to the C. But only if you're doing this exact combination. And you need to be playing against players who don't just have cleanse debuffs, who can just get rid of it with one ability. All right, next we have Shadow Trap. Choose an opponent, post flop still in the hand. If they don't win the hand, you can reactivate one ability of your choice. I am going to throw this in S tier. It's not quite as good as the other recover abilities because it's not guaranteed to work, but still the fact that you have a chance to get an ability back is extremely valuable. And you could then double up on Scent of Blood. You could double up on Plague. You can double up on the free chip spells, because the other abilities that Ranger has are so useful in terms of like getting free chips and stuff and being pretty tough to play against. Having the chance to get one back, pretty useful. Gonna throw this one in S tier, but if you thought it was an A tier because it's not guaranteed, I wouldn't fight you too much about it. All right, next we have Smoke Trap. Fold to any bet and recover all health previously invested in the pot. I'm going to throw this one into the B tier. Fold to any bet and recover all health previously invested in the pot. This is similar to the Threaten of the Thief, except you have to face a bet. You can't use this when you're all in. If you could use this when you were all in, it would definitely be A tier. You just smoke bomb, take your chips out, go on to the next hand. But because you have to face an additional bet for it to be able to activate, which means you can't use it when you're all in, I'm going to leave it in the B tier category. Because for it to really work, you'd want a lot of your chips to be invested, and then you'd face the final bet on the river and fold. It's good if you're chasing a draw and you miss your draw, or you think you got outdrawn to recover a lot of your chips, but it requires that specific situation of facing a final bet, which isn't always going to come into play. So sometimes this spell ability can kind of get nerfed. All right, next we have Spell Slick Trap. The controller of any ability that damages you receives 150% of that damage instead. This is going to go in C tier. I don't think this works for debuffs. I think this only works for one-time damage spells like, you know, Fireball, for example, 30%. So this is good in that it gives you some protection, and opponents will be less likely to target you with spells that hit you with damage. But there aren't that many spells that activate it, and I'd rather have offensive abilities than something that's used purely for defense and purely for protection. So for that reason, I'm going to throw it in C tier. Next, we have Stun Shot. Call up to a 3x bet for free and prevent opponents from raising for the rest of the hand. You guys know how I feel about free chips. A tier. Borderline S tier. Like, you could conceivably swap these two and actually put this in S tier. And actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do that. I initially thought Stun Shot could never be as good as S tier because it's just a rare ability. It's not epic. It's not legendary. But the fact is, calling up to a 3x bet for free, which you can also use when people are all in, is massive. Preventing opponents from raising for the rest of the hand, I haven't really seen that come into play because players can still bet even if they can't raise. But you save this for the end game. Blinds are 2 million, 4 million. Someone puts in 10 million. You get to call it for free. It's massive. It allows you to basically put players all in without having to go all in yourself. It gives you a ton of free chips. It's not even just a 2x for free. It is 3x for free. And unlike the Cleric's Tower Defense, which requires you to be in the big blind, you can use this ability from any position and on any street. Stun Shot, one of the best rare abilities in the game. And initially I thought it was A tier when I made the list. I'm looking at it more closely. This is definitely S tier. And because Shadow Trap doesn't guarantee you get an ability back, it's going to go A tier. And it's like, if I could have this to get one of my abilities back, or I could just throw Stun Shot because I needed the extra spot, I'd rather have Stun Shot. And I think when you're kind of doing that analysis, it makes it clear what's definitely going to be S tier compared to A tier. All right, speaking of S tier, we now have Tiger Form. Raise the big blind 300% without costing yourself health. This is an S tier ability. It's not only a free straddle, it's a free 3x raise. So it's like Rain Arrows, but better. Rain Arrows is a free 2x with the bleeding debuff if they fold. This one has no extra penalty if people fold, but 3x raise, I mean, it's massive. These two spells together at high blinds, you start to see the potential. You get the wheels spinning. You can get an insane amount of chips by using these abilities, and that's why it's just an easy S tier. Venom Arrow. Target opponent takes 20% of their health pool and damage and gains the poison debuff for 6 hands. I'm a big fan of poison. I really like what it can do. Not so much the band, more so the ability in the game. I'm throwing this at S tier. The 20% damage isn't crazy, but this can be the kiss of death. Maybe if you have someone all in and they've got a bunch of healing spells, you don't want them to be able to heal. Boom, hit them with the Venom Arrow, kiss of death, 6 hands of poison. It also combines really well with Plague. This is kind of your S tier combo. On pre-flop, you can hit someone with the Venom Arrow. They get poisoned. Then on the flop, you cast Plague. Now everyone gets hit with the poison, and while the initial player is taking 4% damage, everyone else is taking 6% damage per hand. Plus that initial player took 20%. So really good combination. You know, if you've got a ranger that's got 6 ability slots, and you can get whatever you want on the market, I would probably be loading up these 6 S tiers and not sweating the other stuff. So finally, we have Veterinary Skill. Minions you control gain the healing buff for 12 hands. It's going to be D tier. It's the same as Forest Dwellers of the Druid. 5%. Average health pool is great as long as it's been patched. When I first used it, it was just 5% of my minions' health, which wasn't that much. But 5% of average health is better, and it's good for healing up your minions. But as I said before, the Druid build doesn't really focus too much on minion buffs. Like, what do we have? We have Veterinary Skill. We have Animal Companion. What else do we have that benefits our minions? Nothing, right? So we have spells that benefit from taking out other minions, but you can see the minion build just really isn't the focus for the ranger, and so the abilities that focus on a minion based build really don't come into play and aren't going to rank all that high. So that's why I'm throwing this one in D tier. Also, just I don't know, healing spell. It's okay, but I'd rather, you know, have a shelter and get myself healing for 6 hands than veterinary skill and get it to my minions for 12 hands. Anyway, that's going to wrap up this tier list. Again, full transparency, I don't play a lot of ranger, but I do have a high level ranger and I have got some wins with it. And after having gone through this tier list, I'm actually going to rearrange my build a little bit, because from talking things out, talking about the combinations and recognizing the power of some of these abilities, especially when used in combination, I realized that on my my 7/7/8 orc ranger, I can do some more cool things and have some more fun with that build. So it was very thorough though, very well researched. I have studied the top ranked rangers. I've battled against them. I know what they do that pisses me off. I know what they do that destroys the other players. And I've seen, you know, them rank second or third most seasons. So clearly the ranger can get things done. And if you're looking for a class that is very good for countering the other heroes in the game, ranger is a very good poison for them. Hence the focus on all the venomous arrows and things like that. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts on this tier list, the rankings, you think things should be ranked higher or other things should be ranked lower, feel free to share in the comments what that is and why you think that should be so. I would love to learn from you, just as I hope that you've learned from me watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that this video helps you make better druids that will help you get more caches and ultimately get more wins. This has been Evan Jarvis for Heroes of Hold'em, saying thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one, and until then, you know what to do. Take what you learned, go out there and get stacking.